Fantastic. Okay, well, it is 7:35 and I am absolutely delighted to getting us started right now. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lavine Hemlani, and I'm the founder and CEO of Xccelerate. It gives me absolute delight and pleasure to be working with Brinc and some very esteemed panelists to have a very fun-filled session today on innovation at the enterprise level and beyond. So to begin with, it'd be great for my fellow panelists to just give a quick 30-second, and please keep it at 30-second intro of who you are, and we'll get started right after. In the meanwhile, all the audience, we are going to make this a really fun panel session. We don't like boring webinars here. So anything you have that comes up for myself or some of the panelists along the way, please ask in the chat. Any comments you have, please get involved, be an active audience, and we'll try and wrap up everything in about 45 minutes on the panel side from my questions, and then 15 minutes for Q&A with the audience. Sounds like a plan? Okay, Alex, please, let's get you started.
30 seconds. I am a change management expert, I'd guess. I've always worked in large corporates mainly, but public sector and charity as well, so charity is smaller. I'm passionate about bringing corporations, all three sectors together to solve some of the biggest problems that we're facing today. And my main kind of focus at the moment is really around the behaviors and attitudes around change. So I'm interested in people and the what shapes us as individuals and collectives. Excellent.
Welcome on board, Alex. Milan, it's been a pleasure partnering up with Brinc over the last few months, and I'm absolutely delighted to be working with you long term. But please.
Yeah, sure. So Milan Thakkar, I'm a director of strategy here at Brinc in the Greater Bay Area. Brinc, for those of you who don't know, is a venture accelerator. We identify, support, and invest in startups from all over the world. We have a portfolio of about 135 startups, mainly around IoT, drones and robotics, food and agri-tech, and also clean energy. My role at Brinc is really to work with a lot of corporates who are looking to unlock innovation by accessing the startup ecosystem. So either through investment, POCs, pilots, or just really understanding how some of the startups are innovating and how they can get involved.
Excellent. Welcome on board, Milan. And last but certainly not the least, David.
Hey, everybody. David John. I'm currently working as a product manager at PayMe, which is a product of HSBC here in Hong Kong. We've got about 2.2 million customers, and my role at PayMe is looking at growing our share of consumer to business purchases here in Hong Kong. So we've been very successful in the consumer space, so we're looking to grow our business proposition, which launched last year.
Fantastic. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lavine. I started a company a few years ago called Xccelerate. We are Asia's #1 edtech firm, and we're upskilling economies, workforces, enterprises, and individuals at scale with future of work skills in areas like artificial intelligence and data science and blockchain and robotics. And one of the core guiding philosophies for me in running Xccelerate and the sort of 6,000 alumni we've had over the years is to try and inspire people to really take these accelerated capabilities, whether it's skills in software or what have you, and use it to create a better tomorrow, to go solve some of the world's greatest challenges, to build solutions for things like cancer or climate change. So we're really, really passionate to use education as a force for good and try and inspire millions of people and millions of teachers to create a better future. With that in mind, let's get started. So before we kind of jump into the main sort of meat of it, I always like to get started on these panels on a little bit macro, and then we start to drive micro. So, where do you all, starting with Alex, see the relationship, between corporate culture and what we call the people element of businesses that is all too hard to change, and what we call innovation, right? Innovation has so many buzzwords and thrown all sorts of technologies, but let's start with the relationship between people, culture, and innovation, which we'll define as sort of new business models?
Oof, that's a big one to start with. So I think maybe I'll go back to my experience when I started out working in consulting and working in some of the big organizations that I was working in. I think as a grad, I was like, you know, businesses must be perfect. They must have it all like sorted. And I went into the first organization, which was the NHS, which is a big, quite well known, the National Health Service in the UK. And I realized that they didn't even know how many people worked for them. It was between 800,000 and 1.2 million. So they were off by 50%. That's when I started to realize, like, oh my God, people in business don't have a clue what's going on. And these organizations are much larger than we realize. And there's a lot of people that are trying to control and understand and plan. And really, we've set ourselves up in these kind of interesting ways in organizations, kind of based on an industrialized revolution 300 years ago. And we've never really evolved in the way that we should have done. And so a lot of these big businesses are trying to innovate, but a lot of the processes, policies, culture, everything, structure, a lot of the things that we have in place do exactly the opposite of allow us to innovate. But I think what's at the very core is we as human beings are naturally born to innovate. We're born to create. So what we do innovate is kind of almost despite the culture, the organizational limitations that we have.
Mm-hmm. Got it. But let's take that a little bit further. So what sort of limitations do you see? And please, Milan, maybe you can also get involved because you work so closely on the startup side as well. What sort of limitations do you see culture playing in the role of innovation?
Yeah, I mean, I think culture is extremely important for corporates, especially when they're engaging with startups. Most corporate startup partnerships, fail probably because of a lack of cultural alignment. Startups, they're small, they're nimble, they're usually like 3 or 4 people, when they start out. They're very eager, they're hyper-focused on one problem, they can move very quickly. Corporates, on the other hand, they're larger, they may have 800,000 to 1.2 million people, as Alex said. They're bureaucratic, they're risk averse. And executives just have a lot on their mind. They usually spend most of their time putting out fires. And without the right culture and process in place, it's very difficult for a corporate to interact with an organization and really benefit from an organization that's so different from itself. So I definitely think that's a huge point of friction.
Got it. And maybe John, this is a great David. Sorry, this is a great place for you to get involved. I mean, PayMe was created in a siloed WeWork facility. I went and spoke to a lot of people there. But, I guess from the inside, and again, please, Alex, feel free to bring in your thoughts here. How should enterprises, for those who are trying to build better cultures to foster more innovation, whether it's working with startups or building their own startups or their own digital transformations, how should they foster that culture? And I really welcome all 3 of you to give, your thoughts on this.
Yeah, maybe building on Alex's point about working in a large organization and Milan gets a small one. I guess at PayMe, we get to experience both sides of that. So for those who don't know, PayMe was set up in isolation from the rest of HSBC as one of its own products. So from there, we were given the freedom to almost fail. If you don't know, we failed on the day 1 where the system crashed because we had too many people coming over. And if you go back to, you're probably a traditional corporate, you wouldn't have the freedom to make such a calamitous mistake, right? So I guess the takeaway from us is having that relentless focus on a customer problem and then being given the freedom to help solve that problem for a customer. And then on top of that, because we're in such a, I guess, like a golden age technology, you can build that customer centricity into everything. And from there, you really get that the team rallying behind the customer and whatever you're trying to deliver, and that takes care of itself. And I guess where we've been successful is really protecting the team or insulating it from the rest of the organization. And you know, I always go back to, it's pretty cliche, but what made you successful, you know, 10, 20 years ago won't necessarily make you successful in the future. So you always have to balance that, that I guess, positive tension between the two competing priorities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you find that it was helpful to be slightly separated, segregated? I don't want to say the wrong word here, but removed from the general, more organizational culture that's prevalent at a large organization like HSBC?
Yeah. So, you know, like at all things, it's a matter of perspective. So I guess at your ground zero, it's helpful to be away because you've given the freedom to think, innovate, explore, do things you typically couldn't. But I guess as the product becomes more successful, more visible, more risky, I guess, to the bank's profile, then, you know, it definitely does, you know, pay to get closer to the mothership, if I put it that way.
Got it.
The terminology that I was just looking up very quickly that my colleague uses is stealth storming. So you kind of protect it from the bigger organization until it's big enough to integrate in the different ways that you need it to integrate. So
really good analogy. Yeah.
Stealth stormed.
So that's one of the ideas to promote culture. You know, what have you seen that also works outside of stealth storming, right? Stealth storming works really well for particular types of organizations and industries. Have you, in your careers, Milan, maybe you could also point out from your career in digital transformation, any other sort of strategies to promote, you know, let's say someone is a CEO of a large company here who's listening in and he's fed up with his culture. I mean, he's trying at the top to promote innovation, obviously, but it's just not being carried over at the grassroots level. So what advice could we give to said individual?
Yeah, I think we definitely see that issue a lot. You know, a lot of times it'll be a mandate from the top. You know, they'll create some broad strategy that's not really actionable. They'll embed it in people's KPIs, and then they look around and still nobody's innovating. And I think you definitely need all of those things, but you do need more of a grassroots movement. Recently, we've been working with an insurance company, and they had a couple challenges they wanted to solve. They were looking to really engage their employees who are, you know, frontline staff on the ground, really have a view of the opportunities and challenges of the business, of the customer. And what we found is if we wanted to get those people to speak up, we needed to remove as many frictions as possible, but we also needed to get them motivated. So we set up an online platform where people can anonymously submit ideas, and that kind of removes that, you know, reputational risk of speaking up and potentially being wrong or potentially not aligning with, you know, maybe what your boss thinks. We also tried to promote it on more of a grassroots level. So we assigned a bunch of innovation champions, and these were people that, you know, might be analysts, associates, all across the organization, kind of spread out throughout different business lines. They did a couple trainings, and really what they would do is they would plug this idea challenge or these ideation sprints before every meeting they went to, or they would, you know, email their friends about it or people they had lunch with, and you know, it started to slowly gain momentum. In our first idea challenge, we probably had about 24 ideas, then it went to 49, then it went to 100, and now it's around 500, and they have, you know, 11,000 employees in Asia. And this is open to all the people in Asia. So now, you know, we definitely see more of that participation, but it started more because of that grassroots organization rather than, you know, some top-down mandate.
Got it. Got it. What about yourself, David? Any other things outside of stealth storming that you think are particularly effective in driving cultural change?
I think, I guess the only other thing I've seen that I can add is the importance of leadership being close to the team on the ground. So it doesn't necessarily have to be top down or bottom up. I do see opportunities for a healthy middle where leadership's very much hands-on and driving that change from the bottom as well. So I wouldn't say it's, you know, in my experience, been something necessarily binary in that respect.
Got it. Got it. So if I'm a C-suite, maybe, sorry, Alex, do you want to go?
Well, I was going to say my favorite example is of this is the newer the ways that organizations are organizing in a more evolved fashion. So, and in the kind of organizational change world, we call it teal, or we call it new work. And that is the idea and the concept that there are no leaders, there are no managers. Everyone is a leader and everyone can be a leader. And so if you organize in that fashion, anyone with an idea can make that idea a reality. They just have to follow a process called the advice process. And that makes everything really easy. So that means if I've got a great idea, then my job, my duty in the organization is to ask everyone that is influencing that idea, that has an influence on that idea and has an impact on that idea, what they think. I ask them their advice. I don't ask them their permission, which is a very different thing. So it's not a bottleneck of going up to the leader. It's I want your advice. I'm thinking about doing this new thing. And then by the time I've gotten through the people that are impacted and the people that have influence over this idea, I will have made my idea brilliant. Or I will have said, you know what, this sounds like too much. It sounds like it's not going to work. It's not going to be enough bang for the buck. And so I then decide whether I want to implement it or I don't. And so that is a different way, but it requires a different way of organizing as an organization.
Alex, just a question for me. How have you seen that actually playing out? So we've tried something similar before and we could just see people stressing out and freaking out because they didn't know how to deal with all this autonomy.
Yeah, there's a fine line, right? There's that can't be seen as a generalization. So good point,
yeah.
David.
Well, I mean, we do it in our organization, but we are a small organization. We're not, so it may be different, but it's about, one of the things that we say is not everyone can kind of take that level of responsibility and autonomy. The other thing is there's sometimes the organizations that find that it works well, those organizations are co-ownership organizations. So really, like, everyone does feel like an owner in whatever they're in the business that they're working in. But there are different cases of it working, but I think that it needs to be the right kind of right environment to ensure that those people are doing it right. But also it does mean that some things naturally drop off. So some ideas just aren't going to come into fruition, and only the best ideas do.
So as we kind of wrap up on this first part on frameworks, one quick question for all three of you. Many of these things that we've talked about, cultural carriers, setting up, stealth teams, or decentralizing it so that people don't feel the need to have permission and can have that sense of ownership. How should enterprises and innovative, fast-growing companies think about the, let's take it a step deeper, the sort of prioritization, right? These are, let's say, 5 to 10 different initiatives. How should they think about what's right for their organization? Like, oh, I should do a stealth thing plus decentralize and, hire more engineers, or I should work with said accelerator and try and incorporate 3 startups, but it should be in a different building, right? So obviously innovation isn't just one thing, but how can, and there's no formula, right? But how can they think about what makes sense for them at the current stage of innovation that they're at?
I mean, I think my response would probably be it's so dependent on the organization that the best approach is probably to try many different things just to see what sticks. And we kind of advise even, even a lot of the organizations that we work with, don't only work with startups to innovate. That, that you might solve some of your problems, you might get some results from that, but you should also take a more holistic or portfolio approach. You probably want to do a little bit of M&A. You probably want to work with some startups. You might want to invest in some of them. You might want to experiment. You should probably have an internal R&D team that's experimenting with new technology. You should, most of your team should always be continuously improving their core product. So I think it's really a balance of trying to take a more holistic approach rather than putting all your eggs in one basket.
Got it. David, what are your thoughts on that sort of prioritization versus holistic experimentation angle?
Yeah, so actually coming from a different perspective from Milan, I actually think it's all about focus. Figuring out what works for you. Obviously, you do try a few things, but then you need to commit to something. And from there, being willing to change and evolve as your team and your priorities evolve. So I found personally anyway that it gives a sort of stability to the team, because people inherently don't like change, right? But if it's within the culture of the team to gradually pivot and, sort of, you can nudge them all over the place, then I think that's been, pretty successful in my opinion. Whereas a scattergun approach sort of, ultimately it's created chaos within the teams I've worked in anyway.
What about yourself, Alex? Any thoughts on the holistic versus the specific angles of
I think my
attacking?
answer is kind of between the other two. So I don't think it actually matters what you go for. I think you go for something first and then you do test and learn. So the biggest thing is a commitment to a test and learn approach. Like, so that was what I was going to ask David in terms of what didn't work and what worked in terms of, that advice process. Like, what is it? And digging into the details of like, hey, what did we learn about this? And what are we going to do next? I think that's key to all work at the moment, is that people are committing some real solid time to what are we learning and what's our next step? What are we learning? What's our next step? Which is just an agile approach, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like I'm sure you've heard of the word Kaizen, having an engine of continuous 1% improvement. Innovation isn't this paradigm, brand new technology that came out of nowhere. Well, it's years of 1% improvement for the customer, 1% improvement for the team, 1% improvement for communication, per se.
Yeah, and I think, well, for us, certainly we go too fast and we don't stop and really dedicate the time to learning what we're learning. We teach it.
So then right before we move to the second part on some of the challenges, which is a great segue, thanks, Alex. What are some of the things that prevent, in the sort of name of speed, the learn and iterate model? Like, what stops that? It's so easy to say, just go faster and faster. And I'm kind of guilty of it. I called my company Xccelerate. So, what are some of the reasons, stigmas, or thought processes that prevent the reflect part so that the innovation cycle, the feedback loop, is actually effective? Anyone, please go for it.
I guess I can kick off. So I guess, my experience is a lot of the time, those challenges are around our competitors are doing it, so we should do it too. So, and then you almost get into this cycle of just, playing catch up when you're actually not considering your customers or how your product's actually performing. And to Alex's point, actually learning from what's worked, what hasn't worked, and actually really deeply reflecting, looking at the data and making very considered decisions in terms of how you take your organization or your product forward.
But then I've seen that a lot, right? It's very reason by analogy, groupthink. Oh, the industry is doing that. Sure, one can look at the data. What else can one do, especially if you're thinking and charting strategy in such uncertain times, to remain innovative? I mean, innovation in itself is doing something different from groupthink, so it kind of defeats the purpose if you're doing what your competitors are doing, and it's definitely the easier route. So, you know, David, maybe any thoughts there on how to always reason from, you know, first principle thinking or original thinking so that it's more customer centric as opposed to competitor mimicking?
Yeah. So like I alluded to before, you always start with, for us anyway, my experience is always start with the data. But then at the same time, it's going to get to a point where you need to be brave and be willing to test a new idea or take that leap of faith, right? So I'd almost say that you can look at all the data in the world that you want, but at the end of the day, you need to talk to your customers. That qualitative analysis comes in, and then ultimately you need to be brave and back yourself, right? So, and I guess that's the exciting part or scary part, depending on how you look at it.
Awesome. Milan, any thoughts there?
I mean, here, one thing we always say is that people should have a pulse just on, you know, the startup ecosystem. So what are others that you may not realize that they're your direct competitors? What are they doing? How are they innovating? What are the different ideas that may be tangential to, you know, what you're doing internally that you could benefit from? So a lot of it is just, you know, I won't say mimicry because it's not your direct competitors, but it is just, you know, trying to understand what others are doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think the sort of pulse outside of your market, maybe seeing, and I've seen some companies do this quite well, oh, that's how biology works, or that's how the music industry is changing. It became hyper personalized. So kind of taking core principles of customer perfection that other companies and completely or natural biological systems are doing, right? The way organisms evolve, taking principles like that, the breadth or the sort of lens of your view of reality, that aperture, expanding that. Do you think that it should be centered only around startups, Milan, or maybe even broader sets of knowledge to try and connect, so to say, the dots?
I think you're right. I would definitely not only, you know, limit yourself to startups. I think ideas can come from anywhere, and you definitely want to benefit from that. You know, one thing we're trying to do now is bring a lot of our, you know, corporate customers together or corporate partners together that may be operating in different industries but have very similar challenges. You know, a good one now in the COVID environment is, what does customer experience look like, especially among retail, you know, commercial, anything that was, you know, before physical. How's that going to change? And this is going to impact a lot of different industries. So it'll definitely be interesting to hear, you know, the views of different industries and how they're going to approach it, even though the problem might be, you know, a bit similar.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Alex, any thoughts there?
So the areas that I'm working in at the moment are like looking at what makes us kind of deeply human and dropping into more of the emotional territory and the physical territory. So, you know, can we, as a group of people, drop into a way of being with each other and listening to each other where the new stuff emerges? So if you kind of listen to some of the people, Otto Scharmer is one, an MIT professor. He talks about like a level of listening where you can shift your perspective and start to listen to what's emerging in the future. And he says it's out of that kind of depth of listening that you can create really new things. Listening to other people and really sort of, I mean, it's kind of like empathizing in the design thinking bit, but deeper than that. At a collective group level, can we start to sense what needs to happen now in this environment? So, you know, beyond the data, there's a lot of data that we're getting as human beings, just, you know, emotional data, emotions are data, and physical data that we can get from each other and start to kind of make conclusions from that. I don't know if that's answered your question, but that's the sort of stuff that I find really fascinating right now.
Milan, David, maybe it's just me, but I found that particular thought very fascinating. But let's go into that a little bit deeper, because that is slightly not discussed at these sort of events or panels. So I think it's quite unique perspective. Deep empathy, understanding collective intelligence, thinking internally and originally, as opposed to, and in addition to the pulse. Could you go into that a little bit further?
So this is something that we naturally do as human beings. So I don't know if anyone's heard of, like, you know, when a musician, you say, wow, you know, like, this was a beautiful song that you wrote, and they say, the song came through me. I just, you know, I was just the kind of writer, and but it wasn't
almost like an artist.
It wasn't like it was me. Yeah, artists say that, musicians say that. And actually, we all have that capability. We're all, you know, we can all be tuned in to the source or whatever it is, you know, this like our own creativity that we kind of channel in terms of creating art, poetry, etc. But at a business level, we seem to have like think that we've lost that, or think that we don't have that, and think that that doesn't belong in business and organizations, when it really, really does. So in a facilitation work that I do, it's really about sensing the group and sensing what is needed in the group, and then letting go of any other ideas that I have about what I think should be happening, or what I think should come from it. And when I drop into that level of listening, something comes to me like, oh, I need to share this example. And people go, oh, wow, that really resonated. And so I think we teach this to other people, but I think that we have those capabilities. Well, I know that we have those capabilities. Like every human has those capabilities, because we have been tuned over hundreds of thousands of years to speak to each other in different ways. It's not just our minds speaking to each other, it's our emotions speaking to each other, which we're aware of, right? When we go to like festivals, everyone's, you know, feeding off each other's emotions. Or you go to a funeral, you know, those emotions are palpable. The same with also our body language is talking to each other all of the time. So these are the sort of things that we can sense each other, and there's a whole, you know, infinite amount of data that we are getting from each other, which we're not generally aware of. And my job is to try and help people be a bit more aware of it, and not try and reason it, not try and kind of like, I can read your body language and I can you know, pinpoint your emotions, but more kind of like sense what needs to happen.
It's almost like a clarity, right? Really bringing it down to its bare bones.
Yeah.
David, is this something that you might have come across in your work as product manager at one of the fastest growing apps in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I mean, yes, but not in such a profound way as Alex has described.
It's beautiful almost, Alex. I loved it. I was like, wow, it's actually
I don't know
really
what's coming
beautiful.
out my mouth. This is
No, it's really, it's refreshing. I'll say it's refreshing because you normally hear the, oh, AI technology thing. This is very deeply human and refreshing. So thank you for sharing that.
No worries.
I guess, I mean, in a similar vein to what Alex said, we've had some somewhat interestingly similar experiences, not as, I guess, philosophical, but we did a lot of sentiment analysis within our product over the last sort of 3 years. And we looked at the emojis people use when they send payments to each other. And there's a lot of interesting trends that we've picked up. So, you know, things like, you know, food seems to be the common sort of language that people are speaking in the emojis, or people prefer noodles over rice in Hong Kong, or even the way people say, I love you. So I can't remember the characters it is, but if you use a particular number sequence, it translates to something in Cantonese and it means I love you. So there's really niche things like that have kind of come out. More anecdotal than anything, but yeah.
So Milan, have you seen this sort of deep empathy in terms of design or sort of data-centric innovation? Read the data, even on structured, unstructured text or sentiment of the way users, and you've worked across so many different industries. So have you seen that trend sort of been picked up in some industries more than others?
We definitely see that a lot more with our startup founders, actually. A lot of what Alex was describing earlier, like, people that have clear vision or using first principles thinking are more like like the chef rather than the cook, type principles. We see that a lot in our startup founders. They're deeply passionate about a particular problem. They're really empathetic to the people that, are going to be affected if they solve that problem. And they're always trying to come up with new ideas to solve that problem. So I've definitely seen a lot of that, at the startup level. I think it gets a bit more difficult at the enterprise level.
Why is that? I mean, that was a very logical next step. And Alex, please, but both you and Milan, why is it that it's so beautifully done at startups that go innovate and disrupt multi-billion-dollar industries and create beautiful impact on society? And why does that die out when you start to become a large enterprise?
Yeah, I mean, I think, organizations at the end of the day are just large groups of people, and they may have a common objective, but I think they each kind of have their own individual motivations. And within that kind of construct, I think, putting your name and your weight and sponsoring a project is a bit risky, especially in an organization where you don't really have that much upside. If the project goes really well, hopefully people remember. Most people expected it to go well. You might get a pat on the back, but you don't really have any skin in the game. And if the project fails, you probably have a lot more reputational downside because most people expected it to go well. You had to put a business case together that said it was going to go well, and if it fails, that's really on you. So I think the dynamics aren't really there where you're really incentivizing people to take, those risks and sponsor projects. I read a book recently. It was called Loon Shots, and it was by a guy named Safi Bakel. He's a pharmaceutical executive, and he started his pharmaceutical company from scratch. And as it grew and grew and grew, he was trying to figure out, there was some point when it was a startup and everybody was really excited to innovate, and then all of a sudden it became a corporate and he couldn't get anything done, or he couldn't change, or he couldn't pivot. And the way he put it is, a company as it's scaling stops innovating when, for an individual, the perks of your rank, so how high or how senior you are, outweigh the skin or the stake you have in the outcome. So, in that instance, people will get better returns if they spend, all of their incremental time networking, playing politics, just trying to get that promotion, because that's really what's going to drive, both financial and reputational benefits, rather than sponsoring innovative projects, because even if they go well, you don't really have any skin in the game. So.
Asymmetric payoffs and incentives. Wow. So, yeah, I mean, Alex, your thoughts, and then how would you try and tackle that, or how have you tackled that in the past?
Yeah, well, the one thing that comes to mind, I can't remember who said this, but is ideas are like children. There's none better than your own. So, it's like when you're the founder, you've had this idea and you're like, this is my idea. This is such a great idea. And then by seeing that idea come into reality, that is the greatest gift that anyone can have. And they have worked so tirelessly to bring that into reality. And that is also addictive, that they can see that idea move into reality, makes them want to do it more. And if you're close to that founder, which in startups that's addictive. I want to work for that guy or girl who is just like on a roll, and they're close to the source. And once you start to get, bigger, people are further away from that source of idea. And that's where a lot of issues come in when the founder leaves, or all of that kind of stuff. And so that's an interesting concept. When we talk about innovation in corporates, we're talking about everyone can have ideas. But the problem is not everyone, you can have the idea, but you don't see it to fruition. Someone else sees it to fruition. And that's kind of like, because, you know, that means I'm going to adopt your child and bring it up and it just doesn't make sense, right? And then there's the concept of like, oh, I've got this idea, but, you know, it's going to be too hard to like bring it up, you know, to birth it into the organization. So we just sort of give up. And then, you know, we've got like all these unborn children to kind of add the weird analogy to it in these organizations, and kind of something of you dies like, oh, well, I just, you know, I'll just do my job, rather than like get on this vibe of like creating new things all the time, which is what I could do. And so that's the kind of thing, you know, I think, how can we make more companies where people are just like, oh, I created this and I created that. And I know I work with a lot of people that are kind of, you know, do Lean Six Sigma and help everyone all over their organization to try and make things better. And I think, you know, that's the key for innovation, is it's everything. Innovation is not just a new idea. It's like, you know, we all implicitly know the work that we do that we hate, that is like totally unvaluable. Why am I doing this report that no one's going to read? Like, let's just get rid of that report. But no one wants to do that. Like, it's so hard to pull apart these things that we've always done around here. And that's the culture, you know, we've always done that around
That's
here.
the way we do it, basically.
This is just the way we do it. Don't ask, you know, all of that sort of stuff kind of
Don't bother.
erodes people's life energy, I think, in the organizations. So how do you kind of bring that back? Well, it depends. It depends on the organization, but it's a multifaceted approach, because it's not just all these different things like the processes, the policies, the KPIs, the structure, all impact on the culture, and then the culture impacts on everything else. So you kind of have to look at it all as the complex system that it is, and and start to play with it, try and pick it apart. My colleague talks about, like, you know, like a knot in your back, like, oh, that's the real knot. Like, so let's,
yeah, high leverage points, right? Finding systems thinking and
that's
areas
a
for high leverage.
Way.
Fantastic.
I'm using
So
all these stupid analogies.
I'm curious,
Yeah.
David, as someone who's in the industry and has probably seen, you know, elements of where that passion maybe isn't quite there, and that passion really is there. And to go back to Milan's point of, well, where's the incentive? Where's the upside versus the downside? What are your thoughts, given you're the most direct insider on such a topic?
Yeah, like I was curious to hear Milan and Alix's points. So I can very much speak to both what they described. So, you know, when I joined PayMe, it was very much, we only had, I think it was about 35 people, and we've grown to about 200. And over the journey, to Alix's point, the closer you are to the founder, the more excited you become, and it's addictive, right? And then as the organization grows, you need structure, you need process, you need rules. And that's over time slowly sort of corrodes the motivation, the excitement that people originally had. So it's always a challenge to keep that going as the organization grows. So I guess in terms of our experiences, I would say principles, not rules. Give people the ability to self-organize, trust them, and eliminate the hierarchy and simplify decision-making wherever possible, right? So everyone's really clear, everyone feels safe. Safety is a big, emotional safety is a big thing within our teams. And that really gives people freedom to, you know, sort of explore and innovate, and still at the same time keep excited, but then as well as stay close to our customers as well. I think you're on mute, Lavine.
Taking that one step further, David, where do you see where that doesn't work, right? Where do you see where it does work? And you know, this is not like, oh, there's an equation that comes out of this talk. Principles, guidelines, values, principles. Where do you see it work best, and where do you not see it work quite as well?
I think the way it works is if you're coming at a problem from a different perspective, right? Because I think that frees the team or the organization from, this is how we used to do it. This is, you know, this is what's worked, right? So, for example, the reason PayMe succeeded is we were successful in the P2P space. You know, people paying each other. You know, if you look at banking traditionally, oh, payments is done, right? You don't need to do anything more here. So when you look at something with a new set of eyes, new set of people, that gives you an opportunity to do something different. I guess to your question, where wouldn't it work? I guess it's not a question of not working. Where it would be more challenging is when things are entrenched, set, you've been successful, you continue to be successful, there's no incentive to change. So I guess that those are the two points.
A lot of companies like that in Hong Kong. Very, very good cash cows, but no need for change. Okay, so we're wrapping up on our segment, and I do want to invite all those that are listening in to start thinking of some questions and posting them in the chat. In our last 5 minutes together for our version of this conversation, before I open it up to open Q&A, I'd like to get sort of individual perspectives. So Milan, you work a lot from a accelerator introducing a startup standpoint, right? So maybe we'll start there, but I really want to drill down into some of the key insights on your individual approaches throughout your career. So we'll start with Milan. You know, what are some of the sort of challenges that even till date, everyone wants to be innovative, that you're finding at large companies in perhaps not working as well as you'd like with accelerators like Brinc to incorporate startup methodologies, right? Really, let's focus on what you've learned, particularly at Brinc.
Yeah, sure. So one of the ways corporates kind of like to interact with us is, you know, that they'll come and say they're sourcing specific, you know, they want to source specific solutions, and they have a set of problem statements in mind. And, you know, that's great because it allows us to be pretty focused in terms of finding startups that have that solution. We can match make them easily. They kind of know what they're getting, so there's a tangible outcome. You know, everybody's kind of happy. When you think about it from an innovation perspective, though, a lot of the problems and challenges they're solving are today's problems, right? They're today's problems. They kind of already have a solution in mind. They just want us to go and find it. You're not going to achieve disruptive returns by solving, you know, problems that, you know, today's problems with solutions that you already know. You really need to be way more open-minded about working with, you know, startups that may be beyond your comfort zone, maybe doing something a bit more experimental. You know, you really have to explore and kind of, you know, keep your mind open to just, you know, finding different solutions. And that's really the only way you're gonna find something that's extremely disruptive. You know, if you have a bunch of problem statements and challenges that your business has today, you can solve them. But again, that just goes back to continuous improvement, and it'll definitely help your business. But if you're thinking about taking more of a portfolio approach, you know, 10% of your innovation budgets should probably go to moonshots or something crazy. And even if it fails, you know, it's fine. You at least have that high risk, high return rather than just, you know, a definite 1% return every time. That's not going to prevent you from getting disrupted.
Reminds me a lot of the Google Ventures moonshot sort of thinking idea.
Yeah.
Great. So in your experience, particularly at Brinc, and you don't have to mention any partners, but are there any that you admire, and why? You know, are there any companies that have done it particularly well? Moonshot thinking, integrate into startup sort of manifestos and bring that innovative, disruptive thinking into the culture?
So I think there's definitely a lot of organizations that do it well. If you just look at kind of broad trends. I mean, like now there are more than 1,800 companies that have corporate venture capital funds. They're working with startups. So a lot of this methodology has been integrated. One company who I thought was pretty good that we worked with recently was Schneider Electric. So we worked with them last year. They were looking specifically for IoT solutions for energy efficiency as it relates in the commercial and industrial context. So we went out and we were scouting for that specific technology. It was more problem statement focused. We found 150 startups that kind of fit the bill, but also were adjacent in spaces that they might be interested in. And they decided to go with 2 startups. One was exactly what you would expect as an IoT solution and makes buildings more energy efficient. Another one kind of came out of nowhere. We didn't even think they would like it, but it's a software company that uses AI, predictive analytics, to forecast how profitable energy projects are going to be. And they were really interested in this because they didn't even realize that this was a problem they had, and this was a solution that was even out there on the market. So they quickly scaled that internally, and they wanted almost all of their divisions to work with it. So they really had kind of an open mind when they were going about looking through all of the startups that we sourced, rather than just going straight for that solution for the particular problem that they had.
Got it. Okay. That's very fascinating, actually, to hear that they're discovering problem statements that they weren't even aware of, right? Which goes back to what you were saying earlier on, let's not solve for today's problem, let's solve for tomorrow's problems. Fantastic. Alex, what have you particularly garnered in your experience from change management and the people element of defining problem statements for innovation, especially in the last couple of years?
The big question. I think I love a problem statement. I think people can get lost in business cases and all of that kind of stuff, and that's just a kind of tick in the box activity. What's really interesting is this the right question? Are we asking the right question? And we often we often spend time kind of immersing in the user or whatever it is experience to then pull people out and sort of get them to start to really think about what is the right question that they want to be answering. So what is the right problem statement? And yeah, and I think the key to that is kind of using all your facilities or your kind of human facilities to be able to kind of think about this in a different way. And that's about seeing the assumptions that you're making, and also quite clearly seeing kind of all the external factors, like what is going on around us right now. Let's just see it properly and feel it properly. And then we can start to kind of really get into, this is the problem I want to solve, or this is the question that we're trying to solve.
Clarity, I think, is really about clarity, starting with the right questions.
Real clarity, yeah.
Fantastic. And again, audience, any final questions, please add it. We're going to start with Q&A in just a minute. David, any final takeaways from sort of the success and things that haven't worked out? What you've particularly learned about innovation, particularly from the rapid growth of PayMe in the last couple of years? It's become an indispensable app for a lot of people in Hong Kong, so well done. But would really love to hear the journey from the inside. What have you learned?
Yeah, so I guess building on what Milan and Alex sort of mentioned, I think first and foremost, you need to be really clear on what you're trying to deliver and what you want. Clarity is so important, especially when you've got a fairly big group of people. I'd say the second thing I've learned that's really important is you need to be willing to fail, and fail dramatically, because I guess that's where all true learnings are and the opportunities to grow come from. And I think my favorite thing that I've learned is experimentation is really important. So you need to have, to Milan's point, those moonshot ideas, and just be willing to you know, run a million different experiments at the one time and see what works, what doesn't, and be willing to invest the time to do that and to be unsuccessful with those things.
Excellent. And we're just wrapping up. So thank you again for the first part. And I'm just going to start taking some of the questions that have come recently on the chat. So the first one, or the most recent one that just popped out, is from Kelvin Ng, who is from Singapore's Agency for Science, Technology and Research. And he's asking, let's take scale to an extreme. How could an industry or a city, a country, or an economy become more innovative? Very interesting question. Thanks, Kelvin.
It's a tough one. I feel like Singapore is the case study.
I think Kelvin, do you want to come on and answer it for us, actually?
Yeah, I'd love to know what Kelvin thinks. Yeah.
Definitely hard to find a more innovative place than Singapore.
I could make one point. What I've learned as we've worked very closely with the Hong Kong government, the Education Bureau. Education is what stops us as we start to become adults to ask interesting questions and lose the sparkle in our eyes for life. So for the last 3 years, you know, we've upskilled thousands of people at enterprise and government level, and we try to inspire curiosity. Working with the Hong Kong government, it comes from upskilling, reskilling, and really connecting passion and purpose at a large scale. So one project we're working on with a government unit, which I can't quite speak about initially at this stage, is about putting, you know, thousands of people through innovative learning modules where they get to work with people they've never met online and build projects that serve the Hong Kong government and the innovation sort of tactics that are specific to that city. So to answer your question, Kelvin, I've found from an ed tech startup that L&D at a large scale, but connecting that to causes, projects, passions, and purposes is something that is going to accelerate those cities. If there's no other answers, let me just keep going. There's a bunch of questions coming out.
Kelvin came on for a minute, so I'm just interested.
Kelvin, any thoughts?
Hey, thank you
Kelvin,
for that question. So
great, you're on.
I guess I'm. It's always hard because I mean, as a government agency, we are always trying to do that. But the way I think about it is it possible to, instead of having individuals as a unit, but looking at organizations as a unit, and how to get the specific cultures of each organization to work together for a larger cause for the country or for the economy. So if some of this principles that are shared in this session can be generalized to a different functional unit, how applicable do you think that would be? And I'll love to listen about how you think about this.
So one of the things that we do, Kelvin, and I can introduce you to the guy that does it, who's in Singapore, is we bring different sectors, organizations, government, and NGOs around an issue. And usually it's a social issue. So it could be plastic waste, or it could be zero tolerance for sexual harassment for girls and women. In India, we've been doing things around that. So it's a social issue that lots of different people have a part to play, but not the whole part to play. And I think that what we're doing in that is it's essentially a group design thinking, but really it's about these human beings who are in this 5-day event together, experiencing other human beings and experiencing as humans what we need to, the challenge I think of our time is to be able to see the whole system, to see the complex social system that we're in, and start to realize that we all have a part to play and it's a collective role. So that's one of the things that I think is one of the most important things of our time, really. And I think now with this current environment, what I'm seeing is you know, more and more people are saying, okay, so what's my part to play in this? Like, we're really seeing each other, I think. So with COVID, we're now seeing, you know, we're all in this together, but we're in different boats. It means very different things for me as a mother in Hong Kong with my help than it does with, you know, you, for example, or anyone else on this call. But also with the Black Lives Matter movement, I think people are starting to see, like, what is my role in racial injustice? What part am I playing that I'm now ready to see that I can do something different about? And from that, I think there's, you know, people are going to wake up to their social role, but also, you know, I think we're going to be reignited with our natural born curiosity, our natural born innovation. So I think those two kind of come hand in hand, like being a real human and being an innovative human.
Excellent. Kelvin, I hope that was of use to you.
It's great. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'm going to try and cover two more in our last 10 minutes together. So I'm going to take a question from Jean Su, who asks, any tips on how to get enterprises to build products that is closer to the user, i.e. more user-centric? As people are more distant from the idea, they are more detached, to Alex's earlier point. So maybe, David, this is actually a good one for you to also be involved with, given your product manager.
Yep. So I guess from an enterprise standpoint, in my experience anyway, what I've seen is, to one of Milan's earlier comments, you need skin in the game, right? So in my experience, it's always been a question of finding the decision maker and finding a way of getting them to have skin in the game and making that thing you want to build really resonate with them. I mean, easier said than done, obviously, but that's the well-worn road I sort of tread in my experience.
Got it. Got it. Any thoughts, Alex, on making truly user-centric? And Milan, please feel free to bring your thoughts on user-centric product thinking.
And definitely one of the things you need to do is just test and validate. I think DJ said this earlier, but just test and validate, you know, your ideas as much as possible with the people who are actually your users. You spend so much time creating business cases, trying to get internal approval, that you actually forget to ask, you know, your customer, hey, does this matter to you? Is this something that would be useful or impactful for your life? And if you avoid that step, you're never going to build anything that's, you know, really valuable to your user. So.
Got it. Okay. And last question. I'm going to take two that are along the same lines, dedicated to Milan. So Yu Chu Zhang asks to Milan, for corporates that are trying to bring in outside technology and solutions, what are some of the successful investments in POCs that you've seen? And what do you think are the most important criteria when kind of looking into successful POC investments? And that goes very much along the line of what Jason Lusk was asking, who's from the ADB Ventures Group, the venture arm of the Asian Development Bank, doing some amazing work out in the Philippines. And they are also, you know, looking into assessing POCs, pilots, and de-risking them, and obviously maximizing the ROI. So combine those two questions from Jason and Yu Chung. Any thoughts, Milan?
I mean, yeah, I think one of the things to consider is, you know, a lot of times corporates will look at startups and they'll say, you know, how do I benefit from this relationship, or what can I get out of it? I think you do need to flip that a bit. You know, corporates, although there are certain challenges with them being slow or bureaucratic, they do have access to a lot of resources that startups could, you know, only dream of having access to. And the way you can make, you know, the way you can make a partnership successful is finding ways to actually give access to a lot of the resources that you have to the startup. And you know, if you think about a corporate, they have a lot of knowledge. You know, they know so much about the industry. They probably forgot more than, you know, the startup would ever know, especially somebody that's new to the industry. They have a large and experienced workforce. They have a lot of capital to invest. they have these marketing and distribution engines that can help grow and scale a product really quickly. They have really strong quality assurance. They understand the regulations and compliance. They have access to a lot of different, partners. And I think helping a startup by giving them access to some of those, core competencies that a corporate has, that can drive really successful POCs, and it can even drive, even more successful investments. That's definitely why a lot of startups, look for, what I'll call strategic capital. So not just a venture capital fund who will give them money, but is there a corporate investor or a strategic partner that'll give them money, but also access to all these other resources? That can be way more valuable. And we've even seen, corporates putting a dollar value on, on some of those resources and taking a higher equity stake because they can provide value in kind. So.
Got it. Got it. Well, we do have a bunch of startup founders who were listening in today, and just, for all three of you, my final question as we begin to wrap up, which is one that I personally face as well. So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. I recall speaking to a large organization who will not be named, and we were supposed to do a POC for a L&D initiative for 6,000 people in their workforce to learn Python and really upgrade their innovative capabilities. And so I suggested, well, how about we start naively? How about we start next Monday? And then we were talking about hours, time in weeks, maybe maximum, maybe let's roll out a pilot next month, right? Where next one starts maybe in 3 days. I'm sure many startup founders are facing this. I'm sure this is one of the largest challenges that even the enterprises wish wasn't happening. I mean, they were talking in months and years. Oh, do you want a meeting? Well, I have to call so-and-so, so why don't we meet in Q3? I was like, wow, we might not even be alive in Q3. So, I'm talking to you about days and minutes. You tell me to do this thing, I'll pop over right now. And you talk to enterprises, and I'm sure they mean well, but they're talking about quarters and years. So, how to reconcile that, because everyone wants to be innovative, but when it comes to the execution, and some of the startup founders out there who are listening know what it's like to do enterprise partnerships, enterprise investment, enterprise sales, and vice versa. We're on totally different timescales, So any thoughts there? That's my last question for the evening.
Yeah, we do try to get a bit more hands-on when some of our startups are doing POCs. One of the biggest things is really setting the stage up front and doing a proper scoping. So like understanding what each of the parties wants to get out of it. What's the problem statement? What are the objectives? What are the assumptions, constraints? How are you going to measure success? It's a lot of that upfront planning, like what's each party going to contribute, roles and responsibilities, activities, timelines, how frequently do you communicate? A lot of this stuff kind of gets overlooked, but it's kind of almost typical consulting stuff when you're planning a project. And you can almost think of this like a consulting contract, but you definitely need to scope out a lot of that upfront so everybody is on the same page and has the same expectations. Another thing we try to advise is don't try to hit a home run, right at the onset. Plan for something small, plan a pretty condensed MVP, something that's quick and easy and gets, provides a win for the corporate, provides a win for the startup, builds that confidence that you can work on something, larger, longer term. That's kind of how we advise some of our startups to go about it.
Yeah, I asked for an MVP and they were like, yeah, how about we talk in 2021?
Yes,
Alex.
Okay.
Sorry, Milan, were you saying something?
Oh, it was me.
Oh, David, please.
I was sort of building on what Milan said. So I think the upfront planning element is really important. So, and to make it practical, that planning element that you want to focus on is the annual planning cycle with any enterprise you're looking to deal with. So if you understand what the timescales they're working within, who the decision makers, and how the process actually works. Does the decision go to global? Does it happen regionally? Who's the decision maker? Does it start in June? Does it start in December? So once you have a view of that, then it becomes a lot easier to navigate how you deal with the clients and where their priorities sit at any point in time.
So you kind of superimpose your patience levels with their sort of planning levels.
Yeah.
Okay, that's nice. I haven't heard that one before. Thanks for sharing that, David.
I think that means you can spend about 1 month selling and then everybody's budgets are closed.
Exactly.
Budgets, yeah, exactly. And then you're spending the rest of the year just kind of hanging out.
Yeah,
One thing
you miss it by 1 minute and then you're like, oh crap, I have to wait a year.
Yeah, don't
Alex,
worry, they'll give
please.
you about 6 months warning on when the budget's close. They know these things. But the one thing that I would say is also kind of looking, once your work goes into an organization, is change, and culture is 50% of the change. So, i.e., if you neglect it, you're going to erode, they are going to erode any change that they do by 50%. And if they do consider the culture, then it's going to double the impact. What that means from a cultural perspective is actually a lot of the work is getting the people on side. And getting the people on side, it's not just the product, it's getting these people to feel like this is part of their idea. You know, so we know technology projects, you know, we know all of these projects kind of fail massively because the people inside the organization aren't bought in. And so this is back to, it's kind of a reverse innovation. It's like, it's change management where it's someone else's idea and you need to get everyone excited. So think about culture from that perspective, in that you need people to understand why this is important for them and for them to have their own ideas about why this is important for them. And so when you're thinking about anything with an organization, is how do you help people to create their own ideas about everything? Like my own idea about why your product is going to be great for me, my own idea about how I can implement your product into my organization. All of those sorts of things are really useful.
Excellent. And that's a terrific ending point. So with that in mind, I would like to thank all three of our panelists. It'd be great for you to just post, you know, this on your LinkedIn later. I'll share a recording. It'd be great for us to share this to the network. I thought this was an absolutely fascinating conversation, some very unique insights, which I don't think we've heard before. So thank you again, Alex. Thank you again, Milan. And thank you again, David. And yeah, I hope that you all remain safe. And I hope that we all come out of this a lot stronger. And I hope the audience enjoy this. Please feel free to connect with myself or our panelists. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to connect with you on LinkedIn and answer any specific questions, and also see if there's synergies, partnerships, hopefully those that don't take many years to come into fruition. And hopefully together, the ecosystem can create new innovations that solve some of our greatest challenges. And thank you again all. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.